Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about Robotrek on the SNES. So this game's story is kinda weird, and it's sort of meant to be. It's not meant to be taken seriously, it's supposed to be a comedy. Anyway, you play as the son of a great inventor, and you become an inventor yourself. You move to the town of Rococo, which is one of only 2 towns in this entire world, which is just kind of weird in its own part, but hey, why not? So before you actually moved, you lived with your father and your father's assistant. Your father then gives you his assistant, which I'm sure she totally agreed with all of this, to kind of help you along the way. She's really only there to provide unhelpful hints and to allow you to save your game. Aside from that, she's not really needed in the game at all. Throughout the game, you find a bunch of books that you can read. And in each of these books are normally helpful things that you can create to either equip your robots or to use at random parts throughout the game. Some of them are more useful than others. Some, I think I probably should have used them more, but just didn't because I didn't think of them at a particular point or something along those lines. But they do normally come in handy, especially when you need the relay in order to talk to animals in order to progress the story, or you need to turn yourself into a mouse in order to progress the story because there are certain areas that you just won't be able to get to, and you'll run into a roadblock. It happens quite a bit in this game, but yeah, it's some stuff in this can be just way too cryptic, but for the most part, everything that you kind of make sort of fits into the story. So the first thing that really happens is you learn that there are a bunch of kids who have been trapped in a cave. And it seems kind of simple. You just go down there and dig them out of the cave. But you are not the person who is supposed to be doing that. The town has hired a different inventor named Dr. Einst. And he goes down there first, blows a hole open in the cave, causes a cave-in, gets mad at everybody, and then quits. And then he ends up being a bad guy later on, but whatever. And then you go in there, and you find out that there is this terrorist group called the Hackers who are doing bad things, apparently. And they've kind of taken over the cave, and they're looking for something called the Tetron. And you know these people are evil because, well, the game says so. But for the most part, they're kind of just bumbling idiots that are trying to come across as being dangerous and threatening, but really, most of the time, they just sort of come across as a joke, as many of them don't really want to be doing what they're doing, but they have to for some reason, or they joined under false pretenses. It's kind of weird, but they're really not... They're not really an intimidating organization. They're just kind of a joke and there to give you something to fight against. So your dad ends up getting kidnapped by them and then brainwashed, which is when they kind of start feeling a little bit evil. And yeah, then you have to deal with that. You also find out that the mayor's assistant, Rose, she is one of the Hackers' leaders. You run into a lot of people that are like the Hackers' leaders, but whatever. So, yeah, you then have to go and... You then go to an island, you fight Dr. Einst, defeat him, and then you move on from that. And he kind of disappears from the game unless you want to do some side content, but it's really not needed. So you defeat Dr. Einst, you go and you find out where your dad is being held. And that's when you meet the first person who you think is in charge, and that's Blackmore. He's a weird dude with a pumpkin on his head. I don't really understand it, but hey, he's there. And this is also when you find out that it's aliens. Aliens are behind everything. Aliens that look like human beings. So it kind of feels like there's a Superman thing going on, where Superman's Kryptonian, and he just happens to look exactly like a human being. That's sort of the way these aliens work. So you end up saving your dad. He's no longer mind-controlled. You blow up the hacker's base, and then you get transported back in time where you meet your ancestor. And you find out that your ancestor's an alien too. So you're the son of a son of an alien or something. You're definitely not you're not a native of this planet, apparently. So you go through that and you learn who the real big bad guy is, this dude named Gateau. And then you have to fight him. So once you are done with the time slip, you end up back in the real world for reasons. And then you find out that, hey, the aliens need your help. You get in a spaceship, go help the aliens. And that's when you find out Gateau is there with the aliens, but he doesn't have his memories. He then magically gets his memories back and realizes he's the leader of the hackers. I don't know why, but hey, why not? And then he does. And then he tries to destroy... I guess he's trying to destroy both of the planets in the solar system / universe, but maybe not. His endgame is really unclear to me. Even when he explains it, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, like as to why he wants to do what he's doing. He ends up getting the Tetron, which you kind of get and lose throughout the course of the game. He gets the Tetron back, and he wants to become the master of time, which your ancestor saw when he made the Tetron and looked into it. He realized Gateau was going to be a bad guy, and then tries to bury it on the planet that you were born on, but doesn't. It gets broken into 3 parts somehow, and then you put them back together. They get given to Gateau, who ends up in the present time, even though the story is kind of a mess and really confusing to go through. At the end of the day, you end up defeating Gateau, unless you lose in the final battle and you don't feel like going on anymore. But yeah, it's kind of a strange story that is kind of funny at times, or at least tries really hard to be funny. And, sometimes it tries a little bit too hard to be funny, but it does get the job done. For a game that was released back in the mid-90s, I think it does a decent job of just being entertaining. And that, at the end of the day, that's kind of what games are supposed to be, is just entertainment. The gameplay, for the most part, is similar to a lot of other JRPGs. You have an overhead world where your character moves around in. You can visit one of the 2 towns. There's not a whole lot of exploration on the world map, though. That's kind of a downer for me. You're moving on fixed paths on the overworld, which can be a little bit annoying and sort of disappointing at times, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of twists and turns that you're going to have to take in this. It kind of helps that it kind of makes this a bit of a shorter game. It's only about, I think, 10 hours long in total. Unless you do some other side content, then it's about 10 to 15 hours in total, depending on how long it takes you to get through things, how often you get stuck, that sort of thing. As for the combat, which I honestly think is kind of cool, it's sort of a hybrid of an action RPG and a tactical RPG. So you do have turns that you're taking with the enemies as well, and you're moving on kind of like think of it like a beat-em-up screen, where you have 3 levels that you can move through. It's fine for the most part. It's a very quirky system. So you get 3 robots. You can only have 1 robot on the screen at a time, and you're only really fighting 3 enemies at a time. So the battles aren't really that hard. if you know what you're doing and if you've kind of programmed your robots right. So you control your robot and you can move him around within his little movement screen and everything, or movement range and whatnot. And you can do like a turn-based attack where you open up a menu, press attack, have your robot do something, or have it run one of its programs, which kind of takes the place of magic or techniques or that sort of thing. Or you can use one of the hotkeys, which sound funny, but I don't have a better way of explaining those. So you can put a weapon in your robot's right arm, its left arm, and on its back. And on your controller, the left and right shoulder buttons control either arm, and then the I think it's the X button. One of the face buttons controls its back attack. I'm forgetting which one at the moment here, but it's not all that important. So that kind of gives you a little bit of like an action scene to it. So you can move and attack without having to open up a menu. It's kind of cool to see that. It works for the game, but it is kind of quirky. You can only have 3 robots, and those robots all basically look the same. The only way to really create differences is the way that you program them, which becomes irrelevant at the end game because they're all kind of programmed the same way because all their stats max out at 99. So if you don't put a whole lot into their health right away, you end up maxing out each stat. So they all end up sort of being the same from that perspective. But you can also give them different weapons. So you can have one that's equipped with a sword and a shield, one that's equipped with a gun and a shield, one that has, 2 swords or any other melee weapon, or one that, is just really based on defense. You can also change what equipment is on their back as well. So you can kind of create some differences between them. And you can also change their color scheme. But, yeah, it's a little disappointing only having, like, the same robot. And only being able to create 3 of them. Which, yeah, I'll get into that later. It's kind of one of the things I don't like that much about it. When you get to a boss fight or when you fight certain enemies, that's when things kind of get a little bit interesting. Because it feels like some enemies can only be harmed by like specific weapons. So like a ranged attack will do more damage to one enemy than a melee attack. Or a melee attack will just constantly miss and you need to use a back attack. Or the back attack will do way more damage than the other two. It's kind of strange. Or you'll run a program that should do a lot of damage, but it doesn't do any more than if you had just regularly attacked the enemy. So you kind of have to do a little trial and error to figure all of that stuff out. That adds a little bit of interest to it, but for the most part, the gameplay makes this a fairly easy game to get through. To go along with kind of the goofy storyline and everything, the game has some goofy visuals. Nothing really looks evil or threatening in this. It all looks pretty happy and bright and colorful, that sort of thing. I really like the way the game looks. Its art style is really kind of cool. I like all the weird and bizarre enemies that you have to go up against. The sprites are very detailed. Yeah, I kind of like just the overall look of the game. It's kind of adorable in some spots. It never really ends up being threatening, even when the game tries to be, or tries to make the enemies threatening. It just always made me laugh in some way just by looking at them. Especially with like the characters, because they kind of have like that chibi, super deformed art style where they got big heads and like kind of pillowy, doughy bodies and everything. And yeah, it's a very cute game to look at. At times, the art style at times kind of falls apart a little bit, where you're moving through certain levels and you might walk right past a door because you just didn't notice it. This didn't happen a lot, but it did happen once or twice during it, and I just wanted to mention it here. All of the levels are pretty easy to get through and pretty easy to navigate, except for like those small instances where the doors are kind of hidden. And they're not supposed to be hidden, but it just kind of felt like they were. Overall, the visuals are really great, and they sort of add to the strangeness and goofiness and just lack of seriousness that goes on in this game. Okay, let's get the dislikes out of the way first. I do not like that. I don't like that you can't really explore the overworld. I think the style they're going for, it does kind of work with just moving from location to location, but I wish you could have sort of moved around. Even though this world is like very small, like there's not a lot in the world, I wish you could have explored it a little bit better. And I will say this, I wish the world was bigger. I wish the entire game was bigger, because they just don't really capitalize on some of the ideas that they have in this. I think the time travel aspect is just kind of shoved in there for some reason. It didn't make a whole lot of sense why you slipped back in time, and it didn't make any sense why you came back forward in time. It just kind of felt like you got bonked on your head and were having this weird dream that just happened to line up with whatever was going on at the time. Because you go back in time, and the mayor's assistant, Rose, who happens to be a bad guy, she also goes back in time and then ends up getting trapped there. The big bad guy goes forward in time and then loses his memories but magically gets them back when he looks at the Tetron. I don't know. I thought the time travel just was not really necessary in this game. And I don't really like that you can only have 3 robots and those robots all look the same. I thought they could have done more with that and actually created more differences between them so you can kind of tell them apart. I do think like the overall idea of having an inventor going around and making different weapons, making items, building robots, that was a really cool idea. And for the most part, they executed it very well. There are just some minor things that are probably restrictions for the fact that this was a Super Nintendo game that they couldn't really pull off as much as they wanted to. There are some items where I was just really confused as to why they were there and why you held on to them for as long as you did. They come in handy every once in a while, but yeah, you could say this about every key item in every RPG, though. Overall, I have more likes than I do dislikes with this, even if I do think it's kind of a goofy and quirky game that didn't really do as much as it probably should have with its source material. I'm sure this has happened to many people out there, but you revisit a video game or a movie or any form of media that you liked as a kid, and it just doesn't feel the same. Like something happened, and now when you go back and you look at it, it doesn't quite give you the same feeling. That's kind of how I felt when I went back and played Robotrek. This was a game that I discovered when I was looking for ROMs one day. Just 7th or 8th grade, looking around at different retro sites, trying to find video games to play for whatever emulator I had at the time. And I came across this one, decided to give it a chance, didn't know what the hell it was, and, kind of enjoyed it for a while when I was playing it back then, to the point where I wanted to find it again and, find an actual physical copy of it and play it on a real system, and use something that wasn't a crappy controller that sort of emulated what I wanted it to do, but not really. And I remember kind of enjoying it when I was younger, but not really understanding exactly what I was supposed to do. And I didn't beat it when I first had it. I think I got stuck a few times and just gave up on it, moved on to something else, and then came back to it later, would get a little bit farther, and then just move on to something else again. I don't ever remember beating it when I was younger, so I'm pretty sure I never did. So playing it again for this was probably the first time that I beat it, and I'm realizing that it's pretty easy. There are some stupid points in it where you need to know that you're supposed to talk to the same person 2 or 3 times, but the game doesn't tell you that. And then when you ask your wonderful assistant for a hint, she just tells you to try combining items, like that's going to magically do something. Which it doesn't. At least it doesn't advance the plot. It does do other stuff, but that's besides the point. This is just kind of a quirky and it's a very quirky and sometimes funny game that kind of just blends in with a lot of the other RPGs on the SNES. It doesn't really do anything great or exceptional, but it does have a lot of really good ideas that it probably could have done a better job with. And, playing this, I feel like I remember it being better than what it was when I went back to it. And now I'm just kind of wondering why I liked it back then and what was different between back then and now. Let's wrap this up. I think this is a very strange game. It's got a lot of cool things in it. It's got a really fun art style that I like. It's got a cool item creation system in it. It's kind of nice that when you gain a level, you can, program your stats so you don't have like random stats assigned for your robots. And it also lets you kind of create items. So you gain a level and you immediately go to a screen where you can, create new items, you can combine different things, and you can do most of the stuff that you would do if you make it to like an R&D lab or something like that. What I don't really like and what I was kind of struggling with is how the game never really does a lot with some of the ideas that it has. It tells a very interesting story. It's kind of convoluted and bizarre, but I would have expected that from a game back then when they were sort of experimenting with things. And yeah, it has a lot of charm to it, but the game just never lives up to the charm that it has. And yeah, I think it's an okay game, but I don't really think it's one that I would really want to go and revisit again for any real reason. So that's going to wrap things up. I don't really want to keep anyone around any longer than I have to. So I will talk to you all later. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and see you later. Bye.